January 8th, 1929, the premiere date for acclaimed Soviet director Dziga Vertov's latest work. The culmination of more than 3 years' worth of planning, shooting, and editing, Vertov and his team of revolutionary documentarists, known as kinoks, were finally ready to present the fruits of their combined labor to the cinema-going audiences of the world. Throughout this lengthy production cycle, Vertov and his team pioneered numerous visual techniques and theories in the pursuit of capturing a socially objective representation of a single day in the life of a Russian city. The culmination of over a decade's worth of experience developing experimental documentary filmmaking techniques, Man with the Movie Camera was the Kinok director's ultimate artistic retaliation to the young country's explosive growth of narrative cinema. The seats soon begin to fill, the band ready to accompany the pre-recorded visuals with live music. Lights dim, and the show begins. Initial reception is mixed. His contemporaries mocked him, dismissing the avant-garde filmmaker's approach to realism as a significant sacrifice of form over function. Even famed Soviet experimental director Sergei Eisenstein described the film as
pointless camera hooliganism.
However, the visual techniques and social ideals that Vertov developed as a young filmmaker was the run-up to the total creative crescendo that was Man with the Movie Camera. His years of developing objectivist ways of approaching film through his Kino eye theory, definitively resulting in the most honest and raw reflection of what the director experienced during his years as a cinematic observer traveling across the USSR. The experimental Soviet director brought all the cinematic cards to the table, employing the techniques he developed as a young newsreel editor into one of the greatest and most technologically challenging films of the early 20th century. While many others may have initially dismissed it, Dziga Vertov had crafted one of the most innovative films yet, creating a cinematic and socialistic masterpiece through the marriage of experimental production techniques and a desire to capture the most unabashed, objective look at Soviet life as the newly revolutionized country took form. But how did he get here?
January 8th, 1896.
David Kaufman is born in Bialystok, Russia. After fleeing east from the invading German army to the recently renamed city of Petrograd in 1915, David began attending university, where he became interested in the ideals of futurism and began experimenting with what he referred to as sound collages. After leaving university, Kaufman moved to Moscow and began to work on his sound experiments full-time. However, he quickly found himself frustrated with the lack of support in the development of the medium. It was these frustrations that led him to begin considering film as his medium of choice. As he later reflected,
I must get a piece of equipment that won't describe but will record, photograph these sounds. Otherwise, it's impossible to organize, to edit them. They rush past like time. The movie camera, perhaps. Record the visible. Organize not the audible, but the visible world. Perhaps that's the way out.
Kaufman would soon get his chance. The Russian Revolution of October 1917 was the ultimate turning point for David. Soon thereafter, he adopted the pseudonym that the whole world would come to know him by. Dziga Vertov, Ukrainian for spinning top.
Once the Bolsheviks had gained power, they began to purge anybody who had been part of the Tsarist old media. The sudden wake of openings, combined with his experience in experimental sound editing, led the 22-year-old Vertov to begin working for the Moscow Cinema Committee's weekly film series, Kino Nedelya, debuting in June of 1918. Over the next 3 years, Vertov shot and edited footage from across the country, covering a variety of subjects while showing the power of the Soviets and the greatness that was coming in the wake of this Marxist revolution. This was no accident. The Soviets' new way of distributing information was through the newsreel, an undisputable form of nationalist education for the largely illiterate masses of the new USSR. On the power of the newsreel, Vladimir Lenin said,
That of all the arts, the most important for us is the cinema.
During this era, Vertov spent time working on agit trains, which were the propaganda workhorses of the new revolutionary government, designed to spread Soviet ideals across the vast new country. Equipped with printing presses, editing equipment, and film projectors, the trains were an effective outreach at demonstrating the modernization that was coming with the new government to the isolated perspectives off on the far-flung corners of the country. The newsreels at this time were very flat, overtly pro-Bolshevik propaganda, designed to capture the attention of people across the vast country during the ongoing Russian Civil War. But it is during this time that we begin to see the foundations of two things that would define Vertov as a filmmaker: the developments and experiments with visual techniques, and capturing objective imagery of the class struggle that the Soviets were fighting to abolish. This artistic approach is known as social realism. This is where Vertov first began writing seriously about his cinematic ideals. It was during this time that Vertov met Elizaveta Sliova, a talented film editor, and his future wife. Together, the two would produce films for the rest of Vertov's career, working side by side to create some of the most groundbreaking projects in cinematic history. The two were soon joined by Vertov's brother, Nikolai Kaufman, who would act as a cinematographer on many of his brother's future films. The three shared similar artistic visions, and in 1922, Vertov, Kaufman, and Sliova began publishing writings and manifestos in avant-garde magazines, outlining their artistic visions, applications, and criticisms for the medium. It was during this time that Vertov's most defining theoretics came together through his theory of the kino eye, dedicated to using the camera as the most objective way to see the real world. The camera, as Vertov put it, could look beyond the ways that humanity had been seeing the world since its inception, and blazing a new trail in the perception of our own existence. The kino eye theory is defined by the paths of innovation that Vertov takes throughout his career, and can be defined by the two components: social realism. A machine looks at the world through cold objectivity, showing exactly what is there and what is not. There is no room for subjective interaction or interpretation in the creation of the image, unlike with the human eye or the traditional arts that came before. Visual techniques. A machine can capture things in new ways than ever before. It is not limited to what the human eye can see and how the brain can process images. Its memories can be held forever, chopped up, and intercut in an infinite amount of ways. Speed techniques like slow and fast motion, reversed film, and freeze frames are limited exclusively to the kino eye. In his writings, Vertov acknowledges the camera as an individual entity and gives voice to the machine by aligning with its perspective. As the now famous line goes,
I'm an eye, a mechanical eye. I, the machine, show you a world the way only I can see it.
Vertov believed that when the camera's ability to capture movement was intertwined with innovative editing techniques that focused on speed and transition between shots, kino eye would construct a new, objective view of reality and redefine documentary filmmaking. With his crew of kinoks and the backing of the state-run production house VFKO, Vertov began development of Kino Pravda, Russian for Film Truth, a series of newsreels where Vertov first begins to seriously employ his newly constructed film theories. Taking what they had learned from producing newsreels for the state and applying it to the kino eye theory, the Pravda team produced a series of 23 20-minute-long episodes. The early episodes in this series have clear similarities to the work Vertov did in the early part of his career. The series starts out normal, using lots of inner titles to tackle the subjects and clearly describe to the audience what is going on and what to be thinking. The cinematography is restrained, featuring mostly still shots or slow pans and traditional perspectives. The content of the films feature noticeably pro-Soviet propaganda, as in the first episode, where scenes of starving children is followed up by Soviet officials confiscating church valuables. There are some early hints of experimental brilliance, however, such as the aerial photography scenes shot over Moscow. However, as they move along, the newsreels become noticeably more experimental, developing more visually interesting ways to display the content to the audience. Intertitles become less and less frequent, with a greater emphasis on showing rather than telling. The films begin to transcend the standard newsreels that Vertov had previously worked on, and moving more towards the style of observational documentaries. The kinoks weren't just filming the news, they were capturing the essence of the people, places, and things that they were filming. While many newsreel directors at the time would often reenact events for the camera, Vertov strove to create absolute cinematic truth. He shunned the use of actors, calling them dangerous. One of the cornerstones of the kinoks' vision was the dismissal of any sort of fictional entertainment film, considering them to be little more than a cheap reproduction of theater and simple distractions from the rest of the surrounding world. Vertov acknowledged his idea as contrarian, but found the pursuit of capturing cinematic truth through realism to be paramount, saying,
It is far from simple to show the truth, yet the truth is simple.
Throughout the 3 years spent shooting Kino Pravda, Vertov and his team pioneered numerous cinematic techniques that have since become ubiquitous across film history and across the world. The team began to experience more unique intertitle designs and transitions, applying different fonts, colors, animations, and effects to the text. These visual enhancements gave the text they were conveying more impact through typography individually crafted to each message. This became especially paramount as the number of intertitles declined, with each bold message delivered on an equally bold visual platter. Throughout the newsreel series, Vertov pioneered many cinematographic special effects and editing techniques that would later come together in the venerable visual highlight reel that is Man with the Movie Camera. These include multiple exposures, Dutch angles, extreme close-ups, tracking shots, reversed footage. Visually, the films represent Vertov's desire to capture the most complete, unabridged version of reality. Vertov's pursuit for absolute cinematic truth often led him to employing hidden cameras to capture his subjects. Audiences were receptive at first, but as the series continued, reactions changed, and drastically. In Vertov's writings on the series release, he comments that while number 13 received unexpected amounts of positive press, by number 14 they were denouncing the newsreels as insane. By the end of Kino Pravda, critics were souring at Vertov's work, saying that his career had become far too experimental to be of value. Nonetheless, Kino Pravda had become one of the most important works of the Kinok's career, and was an important stepping stone to his magnum opus. However, by the time that Vertov had begun development on Man with the Movie Camera in 1926, Vertov had begun to fall away from the specific Soviet state communist propaganda, and was focusing more on capturing the life of the people through a more apolitical approach to social realism. Although a major player in the Soviet film sphere, Vertov never joined the Bolshevik Party. But while he had become committed early on to the Soviet cause, both as an administrator and a filmmaker, they had become less committed to him. After the grueling production cycle of Man with the Movie Camera, Vertov's brother, Nikolai, vowed to never work with him again. Vertov went on to make a few more films that were more grounded in style. Eventually the party's rule became too strong over art, and Vertov found himself ostracized from the filmmaking community and his personal style that he'd become known for. Dziga Vertov spent the remaining years of his career artlessly editing newsreels before dying of cancer in 1954. His writings and works did not begin to receive the universal critical attention it has today until after his death. While considered an artistic outcast who was eventually criticized by the party he spent his life promoting, Vertov's works grew in popularity as the ideas of Kino Eye began to re-emerge amongst the rise of cinema verite in the 60s. Man with a Movie Camera is now considered to be one of the best films ever made, and Dziga Vertov has rightfully taken the spot as one of the patriarchs of documentary filmmaking. Vertov penned, shot, said, and created a lot of memorable and important things that define our industry today. He paved the way for widespread visual techniques now used every day across the globe, and his dedication to crafting the most visually honest and objective imagery is a testament to all who strive through truth, through journalism and filmmaking.